Okay. Recording in progress. Here we go. Okay, so here's the agenda for the day. Going through some housekeeping and then doing some light intros. After that, we'll kick it to Melany, who will do her talk on UX workshop and remote learnings. If there's time permitting, we would welcome some questions. And then after that, we're gonna jump to Greg, who will speak to the pursuit of problems. Once again, once both talks wrap up, time permitting, we'll open up to audience questions and hoping to wrap up by like 12:55-ish, because in case people have 1 o'clock, so give you a little gift of time to, you know, bio break or whatever your needs are in life, right? A little snack or something. Cool. Oh, jump to that. Okay, so speakers, we have an amazing speaker lineup, and I just want to share a little bit about them before we kick this off. So we've got Melany, and she is, sorry, I'm pulling up my notes. Melany is a UX and product lead and has over 16 years of experience delivering design interfaces that are delightful, friendly, and user-centered. How fun is that? I'm going to keep this short only because I know Melany's going to do an intro about herself too, and she's going to share all the amazing things about her. So I'm going to leave you with that cliffhanger right there. In addition to Melany, we've also got Greg. And Greg is currently a designer based in Toronto whose angry face is unfortunately the same as his deeply thinking face. Maybe you can give us one of those faces right now. Exactly. Rest assured, Greg is approachable and easy to talk to. His current role is leading the international design team, helping DoorDash roll out globally. Cool. And so with that said, let's get started with Melany's talk. Woo!
Thank you. I'll start by sharing my screen and setting things up. Okay, let's put that full screen. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming to the UX talk. As Betty mentioned, my talk today is around UX workshop and remote learnings. So before I jump into the talk, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Melany Bailette, originally from Montreal, Quebec, been living in the Toronto area for 10 plus years now. I've been in the field, as Betty mentioned. I like to say 10 plus years, 16 kind of shows my age, but yeah, so let's say 10 plus years in the UX field. I do everything from strategy to hands-on design. I actually started as an industrial design and then quickly found my passion as a UX designer. And that's what I do day in and day out. So currently working for Intelliware Development, which is a software development organization. We work with a variety of clients from finance, healthcare, and so on. So yeah, in terms of UX, depending on the client's needs, we'll do anything from strategy research to hands-on design. So I just want to say a little bit about myself apart from work. So when I'm not working, I love traveling, hiking, and just the tranquility of nature, as this picture is representing. Okay, so to get started today, I'll be giving a high-level overview of what a UX workshop is and its goals. And then I'll run through the why, when, and how we do them. And once we have a good understanding of the wonderfulness that is a UX workshop, I'll do a comparison of in-person versus remote. And then I'll finish off with some of the learnings. Okay, so to start off with, what is a UX workshop? It's a series of collaboration sessions that are going to be with a cross-functional representative, and the goal is to drive out some solutions. The one area I want to emphasize is cross-functional representatives, and the reason why I want to bring this home is that for a workshop to be successful, in my opinion, and through experience, you want a group of people with a variety of expertise and background. So, you know, some of these backgrounds can be those with a business background, marketing, customer service, other designers, technical, and so on and so forth. So together we can align, collaborate, and start to paint the picture towards that future. So some of the goals for the UX workshop are to ensure alignment, problem solve, capture requirements, and prioritize. And we'll touch on these throughout my talk. Okay. So the reason why we run UX workshops at Intelliware is because of these key benefits. The first being to ensure the team and stakeholders align on the project vision and goal. So you can imagine we work with clients. There's a bunch of different stakeholders, probably from different departments. And we just want to make sure we have a common understanding of what we're doing, what our goal is, and where we want to head. The second is that it brings inside information, ideas that would otherwise be missed. So, as UX designers, we work in a team. So we might work with other designers, developers. We will do interviews and talk to stakeholders, but gathering everybody in one room really allows us to surface these insights and ideas that would have been missed. So I'm a strong believer of co-design. So this is a key benefit. The more people contributing to a solution, the stronger, in my opinion, the end result will be. And then again, the workshop will bring a variety of people with different backgrounds contributing to this co-design. It's going to lead to less design iterations and review meetings. So as I mentioned, we're starting off by aligning on the project vision and goal. We're going to brainstorm and solution together. So we have a pretty good idea where we're going. So there's going to be less of the iteration in terms of changing your design or changing the requirement based on new information. Obviously, you always have some of that, but there's going to be less of it. It's going to help to kick off and speed up the design process. We have a pretty good understanding where we're heading, so we can start to get into creating user flows, journeys, and mockups. It's also going to guide priorities and story development. So the nice thing is that we're going to have a list of solutions that we can prioritize, and these are going to start to see the backlog. So in terms of from a BA and product owner perspective, it gives them a starting point where they can then start to expand on those requirements. Okay, so at Intelliware, we have this wonderful process that goes from discover to sustain. Our UX workshops will start in the discovery stage. Just high level, the discovery stage is where we understand the current state and start to paint the picture towards the future state. And delivery is where we're going to expand on our designs, create those and start to build the application in an agile manner. And then just to touch on sustain is when we hand off the application, the product to the client, while ensuring that they're able to move forward in a successful manner. So the UX workshop is really at the discovery stage. We are going to start with foundational information like who are our users, the personas, current state, user journey flows, and competitors. So a lot of this foundational stuff will feed into your UX workshop. So how do we go about the UX workshops at Intelliware? Well, through a series of activities, which I will touch on. And this is going to allow the team and key stakeholders to brainstorm on solutions towards that future state. So some of the activities that help us achieve this, the first being the product vision. So product vision is really our starting point. It also helps to act as an icebreaker, and it's going to help us identify new objectives. So we look at where the product is today and where we want to take it. We then look at identifying and prioritizing user pain points and needs. So as a user experience designer, you want to bring the user to the center. And so we want to identify and capture and discuss these pain points and needs. We want to get an understanding of what the new or refreshed product must address based on these pain points and needs. And we're going to do this by prioritizing to get a common understanding of what's important to the group. One thing I want to mention is while we're doing these exercises, we are taking into account business goals as well as the user goals. So the next activity is a review of design inspiration, and competitors. So when looking at these, either the inspirations or competitors, we're having a discussion as a group. So we're identifying what we like, what we don't like about what the competitors are doing, what works well and what doesn't. And really the main purpose of this activity is, well, it's a break from doing the previous two, but it's also going to feed into the next activity, which is about brainstorming on solutions. So for this last activity, we're going to, as a group, brainstorm on content, could be features, functionality, that are going to address these user pain points and needs. And we ensure that these ideas are going to map, like any ideas that we come up with are mapping back to the original work that we've done, which is the product vision. And like I mentioned, pain points and needs. And finally, we're going to prioritize these. So these solutions can then start to feed in the requirements. Okay, so now that we have a high-level understanding of the when, why, and how of UX workshops, I'm going to show a comparison of in-person versus remotely. So one thing that doesn't change is the purpose. We have the same goal with the UX workshop. We want to collaborate to really understand where we're heading, so get towards those solutions. What's going to start to change is everything below sort of purpose. So starting with the length. In person, we had back-to-back workshops. They would be 2 days, 6 hours each about in length, give or take. And remotely, what we did is we ended up creating 4 sessions. So each activity would be a session, and we would do it over a 2-hour period. We did find that once in the remote world, once you get over 2 hours, you start to lose engagement. So you kind of want to keep that short and effective. The structure, as I mentioned, in person, it's going to be back to back. We are going to break that up with 15, 20-minute breaks and lunches, so longer breaks, just to give people time to reset for the next session. Remotely, it's going to be the 4 sessions, and we're going to break that over 1 to 2 week periods. We kind of don't want them to be too far apart because we don't want people to forget what they did in the previous sessions. So usually 1 or 2 days apart is ideal. So in terms of environment, in person, we can imagine we're in a meeting room, there's a whiteboard, and there's probably a bunch of sticky notes on the whiteboard as we work through the different activities. In the virtual world, we want to mimic that. So we're using a virtual meeting room, so something like Zoom or Teams. So tools, I mentioned that. In person, it's going to be the sticky notes, markers, and a whiteboard. In the virtual world, we're going to be using something maybe like Envision Freehand, and we're going to be using virtual sticky notes. And I'll talk a bit about the preparation as well to finish off with a comparison. So we found that in person, there's a bit less time going into preparation because what you're doing is you're going to prepare your activities in advance for those 2 days. And then in terms of preparing the meeting room, it's very simple. Everyone's sort of sitting around the table, so you want to make sure everyone has sticky notes and markers. However, you want to mimic that in the virtual world, which takes a little bit more preparation time. So what we do, and I'll show you an example visually of how that looks, is you kind of want to give everybody their own space on a virtual whiteboard like you would in person, sitting down. So you can prepare some blank sticky notes for them to start to write their ideas and thoughts on. And I'll show some visuals. So in person, you can see it's very collaborative. We can move sticky notes around as we're going. So everybody's sort of sharing their ideas as we go forward in the workshop. Virtually, it kind of looks a little more clean and organized. It kind of needs to be, because when we enter the virtual world, you kind of want to give a working area to each individual. So these sticky notes at the beginning might start off as blank sticky notes. And as we're doing each activity, they'll write down their ideas and thoughts. They'll share them. And then typically for the part 2 where we prioritize, we have a break in between where we might reorganize the sticky notes, group the common ones together, and then vote. So we're mimicking the same thing. It's just a little bit more preparation in the remote world. Okay, and so to finish off with, I'll talk about remote learnings. So things we learned when we went from in-person to remote in the last 2 years. So in terms of time, like as I mentioned, shorter the session, the better. So past 2 hours, we started to see the engagement decrease. One good thing is participants have more time to reflect between sessions. So, you know, they might have overnight or a day to reflect on what they've done in the previous session. More time is required to organize the virtual sessions, as I mentioned. It is difficult to get 2 hour slots that are not too far apart. So a UX workshop might be anywhere from 5 to 10 participants. So trying to get those 2 hour time slots that work for everyone can be difficult at times, but something we need to work through. In terms of tool, this one very interesting learning is the simpler the UI, the easier to onboard participants. So we need to think about our participants and who they are, right? So they're not all going to be tech savvy. So they're not all going to be designers or developers or product owners. As I mentioned, you want a variety of backgrounds. So there's going to be marketing, customer service, and not everyone is going to understand these UI tools. So we noticed that the less elements there are on the whiteboard, the easier it is to onboard. So Envision Freehand is something that we use. We found it to be very clean. And even at that, we'll leave it to 1 or 2 features to be used throughout the workshop. Yeah, so participants do struggle with technology, so that needs to be kept in mind. And one interesting thing is you can't reorganize sticky notes on the fly. And we tried, it did not work. So when you're in person, somebody is presenting their ideas and somebody else comes forward with the same idea, you can sort of group those sticky notes easily. When you're in the remote world, we've tried and it's just very distracting. So we end up doing 15 to 30-minute breaks between part 1 and part 2 of an activity to reorganize those sticky notes. So you do have to adapt. And finally, in terms of engagement, once participants were set up and familiar with the tools, we observed more engagement. So having an icebreaker is very important so that they can get familiar with the online tool, as well as when you start the session, you need to introduce the tool, right? So let people know what features you're going to be using and how to use, for example, Envision Freehand. So that is very valuable. And the other thing we have to keep in mind is that in the virtual world, so doing a UX workshop remotely, it's difficult to gauge somebody's interest because you can't really read their body language. So when you think of right now, you see my shoulders up to the and up above. So we can't really always see what people are doing, what they're looking at. So getting them re-engaged, that part is easy, but you just have being able to tell when they're engaged and not is not always easy. But however, leaving your time within 2 hours for a session, we saw the engagement, pretty consistent throughout the 2 hours. It's just after the 2 hours, it starts to decrease. So that's it for my talk for today. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you for your time. I'll take any questions if Betty says there's time. Thank you again.
Yeah, same time. Let's go until like 12:30, so maybe 4 minutes until we pop to Greg. There are some questions in the chat already. Also, we don't really get that audio clapping action, but
Thank you.
Want to give you a round of applause. Thanks, Melany.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
Lots of clapping. I'm gonna scroll back up. So Laura had a question. She asked, who usually leads these sessions?
Yes. Okay. Thanks. So at Intelliware, so I would be leading these sessions, so the UX lead. We do share knowledge and transfer that. So other people at Intelliware can also lead these sessions. So product owners can lead these sessions. But yeah, currently I'll be the primary person to lead, so the UX product lead. But I mean, it's something anyone can easily pick up and lead as well. What else?
And Cassie asked, do people also record these like UX sessions for those who might need to leave early or people who are away?
Yes. So actually, we that was one of the learnings too, I should have mentioned. So we started by not recording, and then we ended up for this, like for the remaining sessions, we started recording. Just, yeah, for that reason, if somebody has to drop, or we just wanted to go back to something, we had the opportunity to.
Another one from Laura. How do you find the creative energy during the UX workshop compares to being remote versus in person?
Yes, very, very different. Because again, you have that interaction in person, you can really engage with somebody, get them onboarded or interested in what we're doing. It really comes back to time. I think the shorter, the better it is remotely. But giving people activities, asking people questions is really going to get people engaged. I find that our first activity, which is the product vision, people are usually very familiar with that. So that gets people sort of pumped and going. But yeah, it's just drawing people in, giving people a chance to talk. So during the UX workshop, we get every individual time to talk. And I think that helps as well. So everybody's heard.
Bianca is also asking how often these sessions happen.
Okay, so at Intelliware, we work with a very different clients. So we're going to do this during our discovery stage if we see a need for it with that particular client. So we're going to do this per client and at the start of a project. So typically we only do it once for a client. We might do like mini workshops. So if we see a need to sort of, re-solution something, we might do like a smaller workshop. So yeah, it really depends on the client and the need.
We'll sneak in one last question and then go to Greg for a bit. Cassie's asking, how different can each session be depending on a client?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think we have a template, so that's our starting point. But yes, like at the end user, you have to understand their needs. So we do look at, what is a client coming to us with? What are they trying to solve? And is, my current online going to help get to that, right? So, get to a list of solutions and requirements. So yes, we might tweak it a bit, but oftentimes we're able to use that and with like some minor tweaks. When we're brainstorming pain points and user needs, we might bring in also the business goals and needs, right? And prioritize on that. So we're going to look at the client. We're going to cater that a bit to their needs.
Well, thanks, Melany.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
We'll probably have some more time at the end of the hour for more questions. But for now,
sounds good.
Drum roll, we're gonna toss it over to Greg.
Okay, perfect. It's funny because a lot of what Melanie talked about will lead into what I'm talking about, and you'll see how it's kind of like potentially like kind of half done, but not saying it's going to be perfect, but let's try here. Okay, everyone can see that screen, right?
Yep.
How do I remove the faces? Trying to.
It was a little
like,
minimize button at the top.
Okay, I feel like such an old person right now.
I was struggling too.
Yeah, because my mouse has disappeared from the actual thing. One sec. Okay, there we go. Okay. So what I'll be talking about today is the pursuit of problems. So just taking the design approach to the key issues for Indigenous people in Canada. And so what we'll be looking at today, I'll describe a little bit about myself, why I'm here today, about my community, taking a design approach to the problem, about the program, next steps and learnings out of just going through the whole process. So starting a little bit about myself, Greg Petiquan, currently based here in Toronto. Been here since 2005, moved here for school, and currently at DoorDash leading the international design for I guess, rolling out DoorDash globally. And that's my cat, Kirby, age 6. So he's getting up there in age. His face usually doesn't look that, I guess, annoyed, but usually he's happy when I actually just leave him alone. And these are some of the companies I worked at. The reason why I put this slide here is it will come in handy later when I describe kind of key learnings from each company. So each company kind of taught me something totally different during my time, my career so far. So most recently at DoorDash, and then before this, I was at Shopify for a little under 2 years. And as you see, a lot of banking knowledge, so a lot of brief writing and stuff like that, but they all taught me a certain aspect of knowledge throughout my career so far. So describing a little bit why I'm here today, it's not so much, I guess, it's blending UX process with kind of a more personal goal. So going over the past, I guess I would say 2 years now, I actually took this program in Shopify, which is Leading All X. And it was a program about underrepresented people in design. And it would just really resonate with me. And it got me doing like a lot of self-reflection. What do I want to do personally? So having a pretty decent career so far, I wanted to think about, I guess a little more personal thing, like what do I want to give back? Like I feel like I've been taking a lot, but I haven't given anything back to society. So this was my way of fulfilling that goal and I guess getting my feet wet in an idea of what I can actually provide to the to the world, maybe, but going further on. So first logical step for me was actually thinking about how I wanted to give back, and what I narrowed down on was getting involved in my Indigenous community. So just a little example. So where I come from, or I guess what my reserve is, Wabascan First Nation. So on the right there is just a map of where it is. So it's a pretty remote location in northwestern Ontario. There's only 350 people in the reserve itself, like 200 who live on reserve, while 138 living off. So myself would be one of those 138 living off reserve. And for some context of how remote this community is that the largest cities is Winnipeg, so that's about 5 hours away, while Thunder Bay is 5.5 hours away. So those are kind of the big city cores with populations over, let's say, 100,000. I don't think Thunder Bay is actually 100,000 anymore, but I guess for context, that's the places with the largest universities. And so that got me thinking, just thinking about how can I get involved? What is my, where do I begin? It was just more so around, yeah, mostly again, and I had no idea where to start. So what I was thinking was, okay, I solve problems and start thinking about ideation in my job. How can I take that approach into this problem? Because it's just a matter of like, sure, I'm gonna kind of like do an analogy, like we have a product, which is my community, and what are the problems on that community slash product? So just starting with kind of reiterating what Melany said was like this, what is the problem? Why it's a problem, opportunities around this problem, what are the different ways to solve it? Experiments. So it kind of sounds when you're starting to deal with like a more, I guess, humanitarian thing, but and what success looks like for that problem or for that approach. I guess I kind of just went through all this, but here we go. Okay, so starting with problems within the community. This was just a broad look. So where I started was actually contacting the chief and council. So every reservation has a chief and council. That's kind of who runs the little sub-community within it. And starting to look at what problems are they dealing with on reserve. So first one being is affordable housing for people, including students, young and elder. Higher rates of suicide is a really big one. It's kind of like, it's not a lot talked about, but it is one of the biggest things that my community deals with. Higher rates of unemployment. There's not much infrastructure on a reservation. You typically have to go off into a smaller like city around you. Economic development and increased job opportunities. So that was just around, there's not a lot of industry on reserves to actually do. Poor health, same thing. We don't have a lot of infrastructure on reservations. So, and lower levels of education. So as said, a lot of times young adults have to actually go off reserve. So that's traveling up to an hour and a half to a place with a high school or elementary school. Expand the community and attract new membership. So that's just growing the actual reservation itself. Inadequate housing and crowded living conditions. So that's not actually enough housing on reservation. Sustainable income for future generations. Local stores on the community. So typically you have to go off reservation to actually do your grocery shopping. And I think the closest place to do to mine is about 45 minutes away in Dryden. So it's quite a drive. Poor infrastructure and land-based activities. So looking at all these problems on the reserve, and I started thinking back, I was like, how can I bring value to these problems, or what can my expertise actually be? So what I wanted to focus on is lower levels of education. I feel that in my career so far, starting off with mentoring people, but also actually leading people in the design community, actually built up that level of, I can actually contribute something back here. And so just digging into why lower levels of education is a problem on the reserve. So starting with the audience, so Indigenous high school students living on reserve. So just some stats that I got from actual reserve itself, and Stats Can was 70% of Indigenous youth have completed high school in 2016. So up from 57%. So quite a big increase from what we have today. But looking at the Canadian national average, we're looking at 91%. So we're looking at 21% gap from actual Indigenous students actually being on, I guess, graduating from high school at that point. And of that 70%, the numbers actually get even worse because only 45% of them lived on reserve. So of that 70% of Indigenous as a whole, only 45% of them are living on reserve who had graduated. And of that 45%, only 19% attended post-secondary education. So that is kind of alarming numbers just compared to social or the Canadian average. And just to give like on reserve educated, so this is really focusing around top problems and opportunities. So based on all the research I did from the Stats and Wabascan First Nation was some of the top problems of what has students thinking about is like language, culture, and history. So that is when they leave the reservation, they kind of lose their sense of identity because they're pretty much, they grew up there their whole lives. They haven't been like assimilated into outside world. So they kind of lose that sense of identity. Support for students. So that is just lack of support in general. So the harsh reality is that most of their parents are uneducated. I'm not saying that everyone is, but it's just most of them have high school degrees, so they are high school diplomas, so they don't actually understand, they can't give that insight for students after that of why post-secondary education is so important. Funding issues, so this is just an actual being, people on reservations are very, I guess on the poorer end, they can't actually fund people going to school. Lack of qualified teachers and support staff. So this is actually when there is a school on reservation, a lot of teachers don't actually want to go there. So it's just a matter of, do you get the top talent actually going to serve these students? And actually my cousin is a principal, and she said that kind of a rough reality is that Native people graduating from high schools are typically, if it's a school on reserve, they're at the equivalent of a grade 9 level when they're graduating grade 12. So not great numbers in that sense. Lack of extracurricular activities. So that's more so what can they do after school? How do we support them? And limited education equipment and facilities. So that's lack of textbooks and just like libraries in general. So the one I wanted to focus on is support for students. So kind of building a narrative of where I wanted to go. And based on my career history so far, this is where I felt I can make the most impact. And thinking about the different ways to solve this, So there was a number of ways, but I think the easiest way for me to think about solving it was more so creating a program of mentorship and career mentorship for students. So this is where I came up with a program of Indigenous career mentorship. Just starting with myself for now, so just a quick dirty pilot of what it is. So the mission is to help create networks between marginalized people, give access to experienced industry professionals, and build paths to career opportunities for those who have been historically excluded. So one thing that I realized, and going through the data and just talking with my my cousins on who are principals and teachers, they actually, a lot of Native youth do not feel comfortable talking to people other than, like, I guess, other people other than Native. So that's how can I give back to my community? And that's where I want to really create networks between marginalized people. So about this program is more so around, it started with the Indigenous Career Mentorship Pilot. So that's keeping it very lightweight, or just be myself. So what I wanted to do is start by inviting students on and off reserve within my local reservation to start. And so the way I got that done was just talking with the band itself. So the band is like chief and consul, but also the parents on reservation. And so what I started with, it was a 30-minute chat, and they could just reserve online calendar over 2 weeks. So I had a 2-week spread just to start, and just to gauge the interest of how many people actually wanted to talk to mentorship. So over those 2 weeks, I got 6 students, which was actually kind of surprising given the amount of actual youth on the reservation right now. So over those past 2 weeks, we started with 6, or I started with 6, and then I talked to them multiple times over the time. So some of the things we actually talked about was about my history growing up. So that was to get them really comfortable that I am Indigenous, and I do want to make them feel comfortable, because this is thinking about iterations. So at the start, I just started thinking like, okay, what do you want to do? I was like, it wasn't very receptive for them to open up. So how do I start about myself? And then I started talking about my experiences around my career, but also university, college, and high school in general. And then we got into what is product design. A lot of people actually don't know what product design is. They understand that they use these apps, but there's actual people behind that creating that product. And a little bit about history about the past companies I worked in, what I like about them, the different type of cultures between corporate culture, tech culture, stuff like that. And learned a little bit about them. This is where I finally got them comfortable and opening up to me. So one thing that I really found valuable was, what apps do they use? So that's where the talks kind of naturally progressed. And it was very interesting seeing why they use these apps. So then we started talking about how to get into product design. What are the steps? There's so many ways that you can get into product design. So this was just a quick high level interview of how I got into it. And just, you can either go like the university route or just go in a boot camp, stuff like that. And really thinking about what's the right path for you. What do you want to get out of, I guess, life in general? And it's kind of big questions to ask for a high school student, but that was just kind of one thing that we started touching on. And this is just a quick example. Sorry, I just got out of a 3-hour workshops, 1 hour over limit. According, like, from Melany's talk, I can concur with that 1 hour. But yeah, on the right here, these are 3 of the students that I actually mentored. So we got Noah, Precious, and Patrick. And I don't know, it was just a very fun, fulfilling day on both sides. They actually kept booking sessions in repeat sessions, so it was actually really fun to talk to. And I think they just felt inspired from, like, someone else got into a career off reservation, because I guess that's kind of what all they see, what I was taking away from it. So it was really great just to talk to them, and there is opportunity outside. And what I really want to emphasize is that COVID was a blessing for our industry, because we are now remote first. A lot of companies are remote first. So you don't actually have to, you can actually go back to the reservation and live there. Like, it doesn't mean that you have to move to a big city, like for Toronto, for example. but you can actually, if you don't want to move away, you don't have to. So that's one opportunity that we actually got, that was actually like, I wanted to make sure that they felt that. So next steps of this program is that it was just a quick, dirty iteration on like booking 2-week sessions for everyone. So the next iteration I want to expand on is how to get others to join. So in my family, I have quite a diverse family of careers that people took. So we got teachers, principal, nurse, and we got a doctor in the family. So like, how do we expand that talk and just not show that I'm not trying to like push design on them, but just career and talk in general, like what gets them excited, and that there is a lot of opportunities out there. And so what I've learned is that taking that design approach, it can be applied to anything. Starting with, I had no idea where to begin, but how can I narrow down those problems and really focus on, I guess, what matters to me. And there's going to be problems with anything, but how can we identify that's a problem and what can we do to solve it? And the second note of learning is that iteration was key in this. At first, I kind of crash and burn in a couple of my first talks with them, but just seeing what resonated with them is how I iterated on my process of just doing the program in general and seeing what I can do for next steps of the program. And yeah, so that's what I've learned through about this quick process. And that's all I got.
Greg, this is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it wasn't necessarily planned, but it was an interesting story arc to have like Melany talk about the UX process and then see Greg's talk actually apply that process to a problem that he saw. Yeah. We have some questions for you, Greg. Is it okay if I throw them at you?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So let's go back. Okay, so Cassie has a question, prefaced with might be a dumb question. I hope it's not. I think we should all work on not prefacing our questions that way. But anyway, how good is the internet for those on the reserve?
So this is one thing I actually learned. So my dad's actually down visiting me in Toronto. So what I realized that he did not tell me is that he wrote a proposal to actually get high-speed internet on the reserve before it was just dial-up. So every reserve is so different, but most of them have access to high-speed internet just because it's kind of like a government mandate at this point. But yeah, that's where each reservation is so different. That's just the laws in Canada. So each reservation is kind of built up from treaties, we call it. So each treaty has a different mandate on what we do. I'm not too sure what Toronto is, but where I live is Treaty 3.
So it sounds like every reserve kind of has their own setup for internet. Yeah.
Because I guess the way to think of like a reserve is that they run themselves. So it's a matter of like, what does that reserve want to focus on in that term? So chief is generally 4-year term, and then councillors are the same. So think of it as like our prime minister. So each one has like its own thing. And I think that's where the trouble is, that there's no larger vision on how these reserves can empower themselves. So that's my idea, is that giving back, making education first can actually empower that reserve and just build that future forward thinking of having those students bring back why they like it, and just having future generation growth on it.
Now, Cassie has another follow-up question too, was how deep did you get into product design with the students? How much should people know about it fundamentally? And also, were the product designs usually Indigenous friendly or more focused towards the local market? Threw a bunch of questions at you. If you want to go in the chat too to kind of like digest them before you answer, feel free.
So I just wanted to give them a high-level idea of what product design was, generally because a lot of them didn't know what product design actually did. So I didn't want to take up the whole time talking about like, I guess the nitty gritty of product design. But what I found, what actually helped them was pick an app, and then I can describe how we come to like why certain functions are in an app. So a lot of them actually picked Instagram, and was like, okay, there's a reason why those stories are up there. It's just like quick information of why or how a user engages with it. And they're like, and they started thinking about, how do I engage with this app? So it's kind of getting them in more organically versus taking like I guess like a formal approach of describing what product design is. Just help them a lot more. And sorry, that answered one question. I wouldn't say products are generally Indigenous friendly. I guess my idea behind that is, I guess I would say Canada's not very Indigenous friendly in terms of education itself. Because when I was in high school, I didn't learn anything about my own culture. I learned more about like World War II, for example. But I think one of my, I guess, bucket list items is, how do we get more Indigenous culture into the curriculum at some point? I have no idea how to do that yet, but that was one big thing I wanted to start educating, I guess, people in general, because in the Lead Email X program at Shopify, I had this other company reach out, and they were like, they were a company around talking to, I don't know what you'd call it, but yeah, they were the first company that actually saw that there was a Native person working in product design ever. And then I realized, I'm like, I never actually met another Indigenous person in product design. Like when I interviewed at Facebook, there was only 3 other people Indigenous in the whole company, which were kind of, I don't know what you would call it, but like what Kyle did at Shopify. So they were like more of a community manager at that point. I'm sorry for the long-winded answer there.
Great, thank you, Greg. There's one other one.
Yep.
I'll ask you that, and then if anyone has other questions for either Melany or Greg, feel free to put it in the chat too. Also, if you want to actually ask it yourself, you can come on camera and unmute yourself and do that as well. Okay, so Bianca asked, Greg, do you plan to include your family as mentors in your mentorship program? What feedback have you been given from your community, and are there members that are interested in helping you?
Yeah, so that's the next iteration I'm going to work on, is how do I bring my, I guess, family members, but also I want to also start bringing other product designers in, because like I do have a lot of, I guess, multicultural product designer friends that would actually, like, once they heard about that I was doing this, they actually wanted to volunteer and start meeting with everyone. So I'm starting with Indigenous just because like that's what I want to help. But I feel like this program can actually, if it does take off, it can, pretty much anyone can sign up at that point. And how do we make it more inclusive, I guess, in the larger, broader community? And feedback that I've been given was actually, it helped quite a bit. Like, so their parents actually contacted me after, and they were so happy because they were actually talking about like, oh, they have this more idea of where they want to go, because a lot of them don't have a lot of what would you call it, a career counselor in high school. So none of them, they're kind of just taking shots in the dark of what it is. So this is just, obviously design is just one way to approach it, but I just want to give my history so far if it interests them, if it sparks that interest, that's something they want to do. And members, so yes, there is a few members that want to actually sign up. They kind of do it now, but I think it's just like an outside perspective of how can we take people outside of the reserve itself and kind of show them that there is a big, broad world out there to actually to go explore.
I think that program that you've created yourself is so like awesome that you saw a problem and decided to like try and create a solution for it. And also recruiting other people from other disciplines is, I think it's really thoughtful, because obviously design, or even for me, like development might not be the craft that someone resonates with, but
Yeah.
you need to like think about how do I scale this? How do I make the like other crafts and disciplines more accessible to the next generation is really awesome, Greg. More questions streaming in. We do have 3 more minutes left, and I did like half promise a gift of time of like 5 minutes before the next hour. But if Melanie and Greg, you still have capacity, we could like stick around for another few minutes for the last few questions. Is that okay?
Yeah. So there is no way yet. This was just more so I haven't actually built anything out. This was just kind of like all done by email. So just kind of figuring it all out. And yeah, like once I get on board, I can send Betty just a follow-up email on kind of my progress so far. It's kind of like off the cuff of my desk, but hopefully you can find more time, especially starting a new company recently.
Well, Bianca asked exactly this question that I had in mind. It's like, how can we either get involved or like follow along your journey? So that's awesome. Looking forward to the follow-up email. I actually have a question for Melanie too. One thing that I noticed in your talk was the in-person time was like 2 days with 6 hours versus remote was like 4 sessions with 2 hours. And if you do the math, it's actually like you're spending less time in remote sessions as you are on the in-person sessions. Do you find that you're still getting like out enough, like whatever it is that you want to get out of these sessions in the shorter period of time?
Yes, I do. Because what tends to happen in person is we tend to drift off in different conversations, and we'll let people have those conversations, right? And then bring them back in. So a lot of that happens in person, and you kind of just want it to naturally happen because there might be an idea generated. But when you're in a remote world, you don't really gather into a group and drift off and start chatting. So you are more sort of concentrated on the task. So it is more efficient in that way. So we do allow for more time in person for that reason, and we do give more breaks too in person. So that's where sort of the time goes. And sometimes I will like assign homework for the remote, where I'll be like, I'll send out an email before a session saying, please review this or have this prepared. So that will happen a bit more as well in the remote world.
Right. Yeah. So I guess there's time out of the session that the people are investing in. So if you kind of put that all together and like less gets off the cuff kind of.
Yes, and less off topics, or not really off topics, but people sort of discussing things about, the product or the vision. So there's none of those side talks really happening remotely.
Okay, well, we're at the hour. I don't know if anyone has any other questions. If you do, and you're in our Slack channel, please post them in like the events channel, and I can circulate them back to Melanie and Greg. I just want to give like a huge shout out and thank you again. Woo, clapping for Melanie and Greg. Thank you for the time you've spent with us this today, and really appreciate both of you sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you everyone else for showing up.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
We'll see everyone later. Bye.